Okay, next big topic going to focus on Pro Soccer Talk this week. The Americans abroad. How are they getting on in Europe? I mean, we're looking ahead to the October World Cup qualifiers. It's been a little bit up and down. Let's safe to say maybe that's even being a bit kind on that and how some of the US men's national team players have been getting on in Europe. Nick, anybody we should be keeping an eye on? Anybody who's impressed you? What's your takeaway been for the Americans abroad over the last few weeks?
I like our kind of syntax English-American setup here because getting on, you actually have to get on the pitch. And we just haven't been seeing a lot of that with Reyna hurt and Pulisic hurt. John Brooks clearly not himself. He looks like a ghost of what we saw even last year. I'm not worried. I'm trying to adjust my standards. And that's because we've seen so many weeks where there was someone, and granted, Reyna and Pulisic pulled a lot of this weight. Somebody was leaping off the page, right? Tyler Adams didn't have a terrible week, but didn't have a good moment. Really put on blast in the Man City game. And Dest is in a bad situation. Weah is too valuable to be transferred, but he's not going to start over Jonathan David and company. And Josh Sargent is, again, we've talked about this a bunch of times. He's on a bad team and being asked to just go be a tornado. That's a lot. It's a lot to ask. So we're going to start to be looking into the crevices, right? To Matthew Hoppe debuted last week. Looking at the young boys, pun intended, but looking at the actual Swiss young boys team to see how PFOC did. So I'm just realizing there are going to be ebbs and flows, and we're just sitting at a very ebb time.
We are, Andy. Are we maybe a little bit concerned about all the US men's national team players on massive European teams or in the Champions League action? They're, at massive clubs, but perhaps it may have been better for them to either stay at clubs where they were playing more regularly or, move to clubs slightly lower down the rankings in Europe, if you like, because it's a lot of competition. And for a lot of these young players, it's very important to be playing week in, week out, right?
My answer to "Am I worried?" actually changed within the last 45 seconds, and Nick actually swayed me with one of the very last things that he said there was, this is going to be a process of ebbs and flows. My response before he said that was going to be, Nick, why can't we have anything nice? 6 weeks ago, we were talking about the national team and saying, this is the time. We've got the Barcelona player, the Juventus player, the Chelsea player, the Borussia Dortmund player, the RB Leipzig player, and now's the time. And then obviously what happened in the first 3 games of qualifying happened, and now their club situations are in a bit of disarray. There's injuries and everything going on. But then you brought me back. You pulled me back in just a little bit, and this is a process. These are a lot of young players as well, and that's something that we have to remember. Just because they are established professionals and players at the clubs that they're currently at, they will have up periods. They will have down periods. They are all collectively, I think, in one of the down periods right now. And so it feels like we're drowning just a little bit because we're 2 weeks away from the next 3 World Cup qualifiers, and we have no idea who's going to be available, who's going to be able to play. So yeah, I'm freaking out a little bit because of the next 3 games represent a large percentage of the games that you have to play to get to the World Cup. So on that front, yes, but I think on the whole, when we talk about each player's individual perspective and where the national team will be, 15 months from now, assuming that they qualify for the World Cup, I think it's still okay.
Okay, so you're kind of just taking a few deep breaths. It's going to be okay. Just let those guys play out their situations. Aside from the negatives, there has been a few positives. Nick mentioned there, Matthew Hoppe playing for Real Mallorca in La Liga, making his debut. Nicolas Giacchini coming off the bench from Montpellier in Liga. Yunus Musa coming off the bench for Valencia. Musa there is kind of a guy who's just been forgotten about a little bit, right? And he was the best thing since sliced bread a few months ago. So, Nick, there are some positive stories here. And I feel like a few players are starting to emerge in Europe as maybe players we didn't expect to be big game players for the US, but may get a chance in the upcoming qualifiers.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of revert a little bit and mention Brendan Aronson as well, just because he was consistent in the last World Qual. How many players do you think were good in all of their appearances? Adams and him? Obviously Pepe only had 1 appearance, and that was that. I go back to center back, though. Andy, if I want to drag you out of the light and into the darkness, Jamaica, what center back has gone up against Mikel Antonio's quality with Brooks out of the equation if Brooks isn't playing? Yeah. Somebody's got to deal with him. And, I love the idea of Miles Robinson growing into that. And I actually love Walker Zimmerman. I don't know why we haven't seen more of him, at least in terms of that steady, still kind of quick enough way. But I am more worried about the defense than ever before. But then I remember that, our Captain America, our pride and joy, Christian Pulisic, should be ready to go, should be frustrated. And again, we said this before the last international break, and he wasn't fit enough to really affect it. If anybody's going to remind them of the terror they went through, of the scare they went through, and of how, for lack of a better term, depressing it was to be standing there and then sitting there on the field in Cuba after doing something that no one thought was going to happen and bombing out of World Cup qualifying, it's going to be him. So I'm still putting a lot of faith in him as both a player and a personality. Now, we also need him to be healthy.
Yeah, that's true. And I did speak to Thomas Tuchel after Chelsea's win at Tottenham and asked him about Pulisic's availability. How's he getting on? Because he had that ankle injury against Honduras in the last World Cup qualifier in September. Hasn't played for Chelsea since. Tuchel told me he's progressing well. He's kind of on individual training schedules and just kind of getting there. It seems like he may feature against Manchester City this upcoming weekend, which I know we're going to talk about a lot later in the pod. But, they've got some huge games coming up, Chelsea. Juventus after that in the Champions League. I do worry about how many minutes he is going to get between now and those October qualifiers. Andy, do you share that? And I mean, long-term for Pulisic, he had a great start to the season for Chelsea, great preseason, fully fit. He was flying in the team, but now he's out of it. They have so many attacking options. Are we a little bit worried about his kind of just his longevity at Chelsea? I think I'm a little bit concerned the more I talk about it and think about all the players they have there. Yes, we've been here before with Christian Pulisic under Frank Lampard, and Tuchel loves him, but it's kind of concerning, right?
Ebbs and flows, Joseph. Ebbs and flows. Because was it January or February? We were talking about he needs to go to Bayern Munich because he needs to get away from Chelsea. He needs to get away from Tuchel, who sees him as an impact sub. How did he finish the end of last season? He finished it really well. He was playing in most every game, whether as a starter or off the bench. But it was injuries that presented him the opportunity, but he made something of those opportunities, and so he made an impression in that way. Do I believe he is still far down the depth chart at Chelsea? He's probably the lowest on the depth chart of any attacker that is actually likely to play for Chelsea right now. And so that's not a great spot to be in. But of course, he is one Hakim Ziyech injury away from moving up. And we know the injury history there. Timo Werner was rather poor against Tottenham on the weekend. I keep thinking about the ball that Lukaku slotted across to him. Yep. He needed one touch in a shot, and he touched the ball the wrong direction. It went back towards the middle of the field. It's just, there are pathways onto the field, and then it's just about Pulisic doing what we know he's capable of doing because he's done a number of times in his career. And so, am I worried right now for these 3 games coming up again? Yes, he's not going to be fit. He's not going to be sharp. Gio Reyna is not going to be fit. He's not going to be sharp. Same goes for Tim White. Like a lot of the players that we count on for the national team that we think are going to get us not only to the World Cup, but then have success in the World Cup are not going to be fit. They're not going to be sharp. So Greg Berhalter is going to have a lot of work to do, I think, to put together just some kind of game plan that can keep games 0-0 for 60 minutes, and then maybe we get to a point where these guys coming off of injuries can change the game.
So, Nick, looking at these 3 qualifiers in October, Jamaica at home, Panama away, Costa Rica at home. Of course, Panama away is still on the red list for the UK travel list. So Josh Sargent, Pulisic, Zach Steffen, other players may not be able to actually travel there, which is another wrinkle in this. But who are we looking at? Any surprises in that October squad? Anybody you think really has to step up and make a name for themselves? Do we expect Weston McKennie to come straight back in after obviously being sent away from the camp after what happened with him in September? What do you think about this? Because this is really intriguing. I'm looking at Jamaica, Panama, and Costa Rica, and arguably those 3 teams, along with Canada, are kind of the biggest threat to the US. I kind of put Mexico on the top of the table there, but this is huge, right? This next month.
This is the argument for why Greg Berhalter, I think, should have answered the question a little bit more explicitly about what happened to Weston McKennie. Because all of these things considered, and I know he didn't understand and he thought we should talk about the soccer. I get it. I get the sports mentality. But if it's not a big deal, then he should be playing and probably starting because he is that important. And if it is a big deal, then we should understand why he's not starting instead of people tossing around, well, he might have taken his mask off at the wrong time. It's clearly not that. Again, I do look to Aronson again. I look to the wide guys to really affect play, because if we're going to get Christian Pulisic freed up, if we're going to get Reyna freed up, if all these people are going to get any space, it may happen because Anthony Robinson or Serginho Dest or Reggie Cannon, who is an X factor here, are getting into positions that make midfields and defenders worry about them more than what they did in those 3 games. When Christian Pulisic was out there, he was essentially assaulted the whole time. And we're going to keep seeing that again and again and again, foul after foul after foul. And until you make them pay, they're going to come after your best guy and keep hitting him, because that's the best way to stop him or any guy. That's not a shot on Pulisic, right? And I might go back to this when we talk about the ebbs and flows thing. And I recognize that Mohamed Salah is one of the best players in the universe and has achieved a status that Pulisic isn't at that. But the way you look at Egypt with how is he doing in his form, maybe even a couple years ago, do you think that the Egyptian fan base was thinking, oh, I'm worried that he's not getting minutes, or they were thinking, thank God we have Mohamed Salah?
Yeah, true. Andy, anything to add?
This won't be a surprise for me, but I think it will be a surprise in a negative way for a lot of people. In October, we are getting a steady, healthy, heavy dose of Kellen Acosta in the U.S. men's national team. It will be Tyler Adams and Kellen Acosta, whether or not Weston McKennie is back in that team. I think Acosta, you could just about put him into that list, Nick, where you mentioned Aronson and Adams as players who, whenever they were on the field, and he didn't play the whole entire 3 games, but when he was on the field, he was effective. He performs a duty on the field, and he ticks things over. He's good defensively. I think he will give a little stability to the midfield, and I think with him in there a little bit more regularly than those players up top, and whether it's Reyna or whether it's Pulisic, whoever, or it could be Aronson as well, whoever's playing underneath the striker will have just a little bit more support, I think, defensively, and be able to be a little bit more creative. That's my hope, at least. That's the little thing that I'm holding on to as the bit of light is Kellen Acosta, Colorado Rapids midfielder.
There's a big game between Columbus and New England this weekend in MLS, and you'll notice who scored in the 58th minute and is happy and is healthy. I just want you guys to say it and understand that had he played last month, Giassi Zardes would have engineered a win out of one of those games that they didn't win. I'm not telling you I enjoy watching him play or that I've ever given him more than like a 6 or a 7 on the player ratings, but like Chris Wondolowski before him, he knows how to score goals in CONCACAF.
The chaos is coming, Nick. It's coming.
It's very real. I remember watching Zardes against Colombia in the opener of the Copa America Centenario in San Francisco. And I think he played as a winger up front with Dempsey. It was, different times under Jurgen Klinsmann. I think we've gone a long way from there. The player pool has moved on, but definitely a lot to be said for Acosta, Sebastian Lletget, obviously Zardes as well. And you mentioned it there, Walker Zimmerman. I'd love to see him come in and just maybe give a steadying influence on this team. And that's what they need heading into these 3 big World Cup qualifiers. And in the meantime, on Pro Soccer Talk at NBCSports.com, we'll keep you updated with all the latest news from the Americans abroad in Europe, in Spain, France, Italy, England, wherever they're playing. We'll keep you covered. The Champions League and domestic action. All eyes will be on those guys to see if they can arrive in, number 1, good health, and number 2, good form for these big World Cup qualifiers.